I'm joined now by a BAFTA award-winning costume designer who more recently has worked on shows such as Downton Abbey, The Mill, Victoria, but in her early time at the BBC came into contact with Doctor Who twice, designing two very different shows. So I'd like to introduce Rosalind Evans. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Alex. How are you?
Not bad, thank you. And are you managing to keep yourself busy during all of this?
Well, actually, I'm incredibly lucky because I've got a really nice garden, so I can do all that. Spend a lot of time gardening, and I was about to redo things in our front garden, so then I've actually remade the front garden as a sort of layered cottage garden bit. So I've been really, really busy. So I've been lucky.
Well, I wanted to take you back to 1983 when you first came into contact with Peter Davison's Doctor Who in Black Orchid. How aware were you of the show? Was it just a show you would inevitably work on at some point?
Well, I think most of us probably did a Doctor Who now and again. And it was one of the things, if you were less well-established designer, you were often allocated to do a Doctor Who because it was a nice project. You know, you did 2 or 4 generally episodes, and you were able to sort of wonderful old BBC ways, you know, you were allocated to it. There was no question of the director saying we'd like to work with X or Y, and then it gave you a chance to do something really interesting and sort of spread your wings, so to speak. And it could be absolutely anything. I was really lucky because the first one I did was a period one, and then I did a really interesting semi-science fiction one.
So that first one, I suppose you treat that more as a period piece because it was wonderfully 1920s throughout.
Well, yeah, the whole thing was a bit like a country house party with a fancy dress element to it. And we filmed in this beautiful house in Surrey with this lovely garden. I have a sort of sunny memory of it, but probably the weather was absolutely appalling, I suspect, but I just don't remember that. And we had a really good time. I mean, Peter Davison's good fun, and all the cast were really lovely, and it was nice to do a 1920s piece, and I was able to make some of it and so on. And I liked doing the clown costume for Peter, and then we had a really good stunt man doing all the tricky stuff for him. So it was a good challenge, and it was an enjoyable piece to do. Yeah.
Because one of the challenges of that was that Sarah Sutton played 2 characters within the same one, and that must have been a fantastic opportunity to design beautiful 20s costumes, but you know, more than one for the same character.
It was very interesting because we had her being Michael Cochrane's wife, and we also had her being Doctor Who's assistant. Yes, and then the identical fancy dress costume. So it was a really fun thing to do. And the fancy dress, there was a certain way of doing fancy dress in the 1920s. One never realizes it, but always period costume or fancy dress costume has a kind of fashion element to it. So I made them look a bit 20s. And funnily enough, my grandmother had been a great maker and was really interested in things like that. And we had left over around at home fancy dress costumes I think she'd made for my mother, possibly in the 30s. So there was this kind of wonderful feeling. And I know she made a rose costume for me when I was a little girl. And I used that as a kind of starting point for the costume that I did for Tegan when she was dressed as Rose. So there are all sorts of layered things that were quite fun to do. And it was lovely to do that cricket match. And I think we did have quite nice weather for that. And Michael Cochrane was really good fun. So a lot of it was an enjoyable thing to do. But I suspect that the less good bits have sort of happily faded away with memory. But I think it was quite successful, actually. And the dressing Doctor Who up as something else other than himself was quite a nice thing to be able to do, which quite often doesn't happen. Everyone else is dressed as things around them. But putting our main characters into costumes of someone else was quite an interesting concept, I think, yeah. And I actually happened to have Doctor Who, because obviously he was dressed up at the fancy dress party as a Harlequin. And I actually happened to have here the costume which we designed, and then the obviously he had a sort of the face mask on as well. So our stunt man, Gareth Milne, was able to be in the identical thing. Actually, I have a feeling that when it was finally done, it was not quite as detailed as my imaginations were when I was first doing the drawing. But it was a nice thing to do. And again, it was a very sort of slightly commedia dell'arte-ish and slightly 20s take on how a clown might have looked. And then Tegan, who was dressed as the Rose, and here's, again, just by chance, I'd completely forgotten I had these, and then I found them the other day and had them framed. So here we have Tegan's costume as the Rose, and that as kind of, it had petals of layered chiffon and things here, and then the sort of stalk and so on going upwards here. But that was all, and that was vaguely inspired by this costume I had when I was a little girl that my grandmother made me. So there we are, some sort of backwards reflections.
So your costume designs, what medium do you work in? Because I know so many designers use, watercolors or mixed media. What was your preference?
Well, I think I've kind of changed, because when I first started, I think I tended to do we had much more time. So I would do a proper drawing and then do samples of fabric and so on. And I still would do that. Possibly if I was doing something for the theatre now, because I've got much more time. But so often with television, we've hardly got any time. And so it's a great rush. And so I tend to I'll do a mood board for a character. And then I might do a few designs, but sometimes I'll do a pencil, I'll do colours and things and a mood board, and then I'll do a pencil drawing for a maker. But I won't necessarily have time to do a proper painted design. As I say, I would for something in the theatre where you've got much more time and, we discuss it all with everybody. But just trying to think when, it's all a time thing. It's quite sad, really, because of the opera I've just not done. I'd done a whole set of drawings for, because obviously, and also I'd done presentations for sort of fundraising and attracting support and so on. And so, then I'd had time to do everything properly. Not that I do it improperly, but it's literally a sign of the times that we don't always have so long anymore, which is a great pity.
There's something like your second encounter with Doctor Who, The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. That time to develop each look must have been very important, because no two characters wore the same costume.
Well, the script was very good because it steered me towards all the different characters, and some of it was things that I found. So you do a really interesting fitting, and put pieces together. So I think we made the ringmaster, and obviously we made the masks for all the clown costumes and so on. But some of it, things like what Peggy Mount wore as a sort of mad, sort of intergalactic char lady, or our explorers and things like that, I would find stuff rather as you might do if you were doing a period fitting nowadays, and put it together. But it was really fun, because you're finding things from all sorts of different places. And because it was done much more as if you were doing a film nowadays, because you nearly always shoot on location. It's rare. Well, you might do interior stuff in sets, or you'll use the interior of a house and so on, but we weren't able to use the film studios, and so it all had to be done on location. And we had this huge tent, so it was much more like the circus, in a quarry in Dorset. And I remember it was very, very hot, and we were down in this quarry. And then we shot other bits in the sort of grasslands around the quarry. And it was more unusual for then, but actually it's become something, it's what we always do nowadays. And so it was quite literally ground almost breaking at the time to do so much more on a television piece, not in a film studio. Because what you used to do was shoot all the exteriors, and then you'd on film, not on tape, and then, or obviously now it's all done digitally, so it's a completely different thing. But then you'd record all the main stuff in the studio, because I can remember when I was the design assistant on the first Poldark, and that's going back a long way. and we shot all the exteriors in Cornwall, and then they'd have that edited in bits, and then we'd shoot the interiors in the studio in London, and you did it all, not exactly live, but you did it all kind of almost continuously in the evening, having rehearsed all day. And then there'd come a bit in the story and they'd say run VT, and then they would record onto the tape the already edited film that we'd shot in Cornwall, and you just hoped it would all match, because there was this terrible thing. In the studio, the same costume would look a different colour on the old-fashioned television cameras as it would do. So it looked, you'd have someone go through a door, and they go through a door wearing grey and come out wearing blue, literally because the film camera had registered it more accurately, the colour, and then the television camera, it's like with black and white, there were all these awful greys because you couldn't shoot on white. I mean, nothing that ever happens now. So you'd have all this problem of and you'd think, is it going to look okay? You know, because you wouldn't necessarily have seen the videotape well till the last minute when they were actually running it to put it all in as part of the show. But at least that was the studio stuff we were doing was done, actually rehearsed, and you know, you could stop, because it used to be done. And I remember the sort of team, the standbys and dressers who were working with us saying, when they were first doing television, I mean, some things would have to be done twice a week, because if there was a show that was done on a Wednesday and it was repeated on a Saturday, they have to do it again. And once there was a famous occasion when somebody had gone on stage very quickly to do a quick change or adjust something before they turned over, and they'd gone out the wrong door and they'd gone into a cupboard instead of leaving the set. And so they had to spend the whole of the rest of the show in the cupboard because they couldn't stop, because it was going out to a live audience. So there were no dressers because the dresser was shut in the cupboard on the set. Because obviously they couldn't come out, because this is what the Saturday night performance of Z-Cars or something, which they'd seen first on the Wednesday. So things have changed a lot. I wasn't there then, I have to say. Yeah, this is the time I was there, that sort of thing had stopped. But anyway.
So how had you first come into working at the BBC? Was it always an ambition to go into costume?
Oh no, I'd always wanted to be a costume designer. Well, since I was going to do fashion journalism, and I suddenly realised that it was clothes and words that interested me, and I suddenly realised that it was interpreting words with clothes was what I liked, rather than and I'd been interested in drama and so on, and then I designed a show at the end of my last year at school, and thought, actually, this is what I want to do. And so while I was at university, I spent my whole time designing shows and went to the Edinburgh Festival and lots of stuff. But I thought what I'd really like to do is work in film or television. But I was very lucky. I went to work at the Royal Opera House first. So I loved working on ballet and opera. So I still work in the theatre, and I still do a bit of opera now and again if I can, because otherwise I miss it a bit. And I've been quite lucky over, recently I've done operas and I've done something for the RSC and so on. So I can, I've been in a position to be able to do both. But I went to the BBC after I'd been working at the Opera House for 2 years. And then it was at a time when television was expanding enormously. And because BBC Two and Colour and Masses, the studios were constantly full all the time of stuff being done, with lots and lots of interesting new ways of doing things. So I was joined there at a very good time, actually. Yeah.
And am I right in thinking that an early design job would have been the Flipside of Dominick Hide?
Absolutely, yes. So that was just a brilliant thing to do. I think it was one of the first big things I did as a designer, and it was a wonderful script.
So Peter Firth would have been Dominic in that?
Absolutely, Peter Firth was, and he was just a sort of really brilliant up-and-coming actor, and he had a huge success in Equus when he was quite young. And it was a really good piece for him to do. And it was so interesting. And it was all about stuff that's so pertinent now, with like the ozone layer going. So then I designed those hats, which were to protect people from sun. I mean, all the things that, you just think about ordinary now. And that was before sun cream with lots of SPF in had come, and loads of things. And it was really interesting, in the 2 different time zones and all the rest of it. So, and doing the bits, and we filmed in the Portobello Road, which was fantastic. And I was trying to think when we did it, 1980? Yeah, 1980, Portobello. So it was all quite kind of friendly fun. We filmed in the Portobello Road, we filmed in the television studios, and we were able to do this sort of marvellous kind of space capsule houses and things. A lot of it probably, one were to look at it again, like what some design, modern housing design is like now. And there was lots of things about cleaning and about attitudes to food, lots of things which now, 30 years later, have become kind of norms. And it's funny because Peter was in Victoria. He played Queen Victoria's uncle. When was that? Yeah, he wasn't in season 3, but he was in seasons 1 and 2, and it's lovely seeing him again. But a few years had passed obviously since then, and he it was a lovely piece, and I was really lucky because it was something that turned out to be very kind of successful and edgy. And I think someone saw it as a sort of small, slightly left field play for today. And because I wasn't very well known, they thought, oh, well, Ross can do it. And it kind of, and then I ended up doing something that was really important. So I was quite lucky in a way doing that.
And it must have been one of the few instances where you got to revisit a project, because the following year you had another flip.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a wonderful writer and director. That was just really, they went off. I was just trying to think the name of the writer, but I mean, he did loads of things after that. So it was absolutely one of those lucky moments, actually.
And as you perhaps became a more experienced designer, there seems to be a lot more period dramas, and still, I suppose, is the case now. Is period what particularly interests you?
I loved. Yes, it is. I mean, I like doing interesting modern pieces with really good stories that the clothes are kind of incidental to, in a way. I mean, I loved, for instance, doing A Perfect Spy, which was modern, but because it was to do with the people, you had to make the clothes look like the people, so that you aren't thinking, why are they wearing that? You think, oh, I believe in that character because that's what they should be wearing, which is the way round things should be. And then I love doing period because there's all the fun of research, and sometimes you are doing a completely fictional piece, in which means you've got much more sort of leeway, and sometimes you're doing a piece about a historical person, but you want it to look like a drama and not like a documentary. So when I'm doing something like Victoria, you do look into exactly what she would have worn, but then obviously Jenna isn't Queen Victoria and Tom isn't Albert, but they're playing these parts in a drama about Victoria and Albert. So you are making them be the people, but you're not doing a historical reconstruction. So you have to be, then I do spend a lot of time thinking about how the colours are going to be, and how we're going to take a certain sort of theme and so on. But you have to not get it wrong unless you decide to change it for a reason. And then if you're challenged, you can say, yes, I know it should be X, but we did Y because it's not knowing about X that's always the problem.
Because, of course, something, like Victoria, it goes out to millions. It's available so almost forever with things like DVDs. How has sort of the increased scrutiny of your work affected how you go about things? Because, of course, things like Doctor Who and the Flipside were never intended to be repeated.
Well, I just think I want to get it right. And as long as I get it right and the actors feel they're in the right things and everyone's happy with the piece when you do it, then I'm not fussed, if you see what I mean. If the public think it's great and you get good viewing figures or you get nominated for something, then that's lovely. But that's not the point. And I don't get involved in social media or see what people are saying, because I think there's absolutely a point. It's rather like actors not reading their reviews in the papers. I mean, I'm always thrilled when I do something in the theatre. If we get 4 stars in the Times or whatever, then that's lovely. And I'm pleased for the actors and I'm pleased for the director. And if people like the clothes, then that's great. But as long as I feel what I've done works, and the cast and the actors are happy, and then the distributors, you know, if PBS and BBC or ITV or whoever it is are happy, and then they say, well, can you come and do another one or whatever, then that's how I feel about something, you know. That's not about, I don't think about, I'm not watching people on Twitter saying, it's just not a thing that I would do really, because I wouldn't achieve anything really by doing that.
And obviously, you still continue to jump between television, opera, theatre. Do you think it's quite healthy to have that sort of cross-pollination of areas?
Well, personally, I do, yes. I mean, I would really miss not doing theatre, because I had a kind of fate when after I left Scottish Ballet, because I went to the BBC, and then I went back because I thought I can't bear not doing ballet and opera. So I went back and ran Scottish Ballet costume department for a year and working with lovely designers and that. And then I got a permanent job at the BBC at a really good time, and I stayed there a long time. But then when I left the BBC and went freelance, and then got the opportunity to do other things, and then I work with the same director a lot, Selena Cadell, who actually played Daniel Craig's sister in Sword of Honour, which is when I met her. And we got on so well. And then she is a specialist in restoration comedy. And then we found different ways of doing things. And so I worked with her on projects, and I've done other projects a bit for people as well. And I would miss it a lot, yes, because you've got much more freedom, because it's a different thing, theatre, because, you know, you're in a theatre, and the audience are choosing what to watch and how they think about things. They're not being controlled by the director and the cameraman as to what to watch and how to see things. So it's a very, very different medium. And I really love it. And the fact that it's always a bit different every night, and the relationship, because you get them already every time, you know. It's not like, because once you've turned over on a big scene on film or on a television piece, you know, once I know it's right, then I don't have to bother. I mean, obviously in the theatre I leave it to my team, but every night they have to get it right every time. So it's a kind of a whole different tension and way of working, which I love when you're in tech and when you're doing preview, you know, and every night you think, is there more we could do? How can we change it? You know, and that's really fun, just to get it absolutely right, which you never get the chance. I mean, you do fittings and things, but in film and television, usually once you've turned over on something, unless they hate it and they're not going to want to reshoot, you know, that's it. You never get this chance to just tweak and tweak till it's perfect. So it's a different sort of a thing.
And from a design point of view, obviously, you know, we touched earlier that you have more time in theatre. Do you have to approach the costumes differently? Because, of course, television, you know, everything's HD today, whereas theatre, you might have a series of quick changes. How different do you have to approach anything?
Well, in theatre, it's got to have to be sturdier in a way, because it's got to last. You know, if you've got a 3-month run, it's got to stay the course. You know, but it's the same as in, you know, there'll be several shirts for the actors and things. But then, if you're doing a long run of something on TV, you're going to have doubles and triples of some things, so that people are always in clean things. But it is. And you'll work out the changes, but it is amazing how, on the whole, you don't do Velcros and stuff, because really skilled dressers can do very complicated changes very quickly. It's extraordinary. I mean, it's only going to be in some sort of magic something or other that you'll do Velcro up the back or something. They tend to actually do a proper change just really quickly, you know, and they all choreograph it so as they come off stage, we're taking things off and the dressers will be there and it'll work, and you can do it. But actually, on the whole, in the theatre, there are fewer changes. Why everything has to be right, unless you do something during an act. You know, there's never going to be more than 2 or 3 things. And extraordinary. I mean, and in ballet, they will change between everything, and even there, it's really quick. And when I was first working at the Opera House, I remember talking to some people who'd worked when the Bolshoi Ballet first came to England. So this will be late 60s. Early 70s, when they were still coming over, and they were sewn into the costumes, and in the quick changes the dressers would they've just unpick them and re-sew them in, so that it was a perfect fit and there was no risk. So, and that was backstage at wherever they were doing this, at on the stage of the Opera House or at the Coliseum or whatever, and that was done I mean, I think they don't now, but until very recently they did. And that's a marvellously sort of old school thing, really, if you think about it. So it's extraordinary what can be achieved.
Yes, yeah, it's always amazing.
And it just goes to show, because all of it's about teams. It's not just one person. You know, the designers will sort of have an overview, but none of it works if you haven't got loads of people helping you make things, or, well, doing the making, yes, and helping everyone put it on properly and all the rest of it. None of it works with just one person. You need a lot of people to get to function properly.
So when you'd started out as a sort of design assistant, who were the people that you would have particularly learned from then?
Well, I was very lucky. When I went into the BBC, and the first show I went to work on was working with June Hudson on a Doctor Who. No, it wasn't Doctor Who. She'd done Doctor Who, but I was doing a thing called The Survivors, and this is in 1974, and we went off to Wales and filmed it all, or in the sort of Welsh, near Monmouth, in the kind of Welsh borders. And then I did, just trying to think, various things, but then the first big project I did was the original Poldark, which John Bloomfield designed, and he was a huge kind of, he'd worked in the theatre and was still working in the theatre as well. The BBC used to let him out to do, because when I was doing Poldark with him, he was also designing for Chichester at the same time. So I did far more than I would normally have done, because he was off down at Chichester. So working on both at once. I don't know how much everyone knew about it, but he was certainly doing both. And he designed those 6 Wives of Henry VIII. And so he was a really kind of groundbreaking person in seeing what could be done and how things could be made to look interesting, believable, but different and not so expensive, you know. I mean, it was a very new way of doing clothes and things, because I know, I mean, my generation was different, but when I started, there were and certainly there were memories of the sort of the costume designers. The ladies used to wear hats and gloves and handbags to fittings, you know. I mean, it was just sort of marvellously old school, early 60s kind of thing, you know. And I can remember one or two of the older, grander ladies would come in sort of trailing assistants, carrying everything for them. And I swore that I would never let people carry anything for me, and used to drive my assistants mad, and still do, because they're saying, can't I carry? And I said, no. I mean, there comes a moment when you can't carry everything, you know, and nowadays you've got it all in your car and so on anyway. But I thought, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to be the one coming in with this trail of designers behind, of assistants behind you, carrying everything, and you just have a bag in the crook of your arm. Just marvellous. Such another world, really.
So having worked with John on something like Poldark, was it quite nice then to be designing your own version of it in the late 90s?
Actually, yes, it was. And it was funny, because, I mean, I know they've revisited the whole thing now, but we were, and actually the BBC rented me out to ITV to do it, because ITV were doing this version of Poldark set in about 1815 or so, with John Bowles playing older Poldark, and trying to think who was, it wasn't the original. Oh, I know what it was, because Robin it was going to be Robin and Harrod, and Robin wouldn't do it, and so Anne Harrod wouldn't either. So at the last minute they brought in others, but the real thing, it was the next generation. So I was really lucky, because it was Kelly Riley and Jan Griffith, who were just lovely, and it was all about them, really, and them doing sort of smuggling. And I can remember filming on these beaches in the middle of the night in Cornwall. We had a terrific time, and it was really interesting, and that's what it was really about. And that was set in, I don't know whether it was people, I can't remember exactly the plot, and sadly it wasn't as successful, I don't think, as people had hoped it would be. But they'd asked me to do it because I'd been involved with the original one. And of course, it had originally been Robin and Anne Harrod, and I think they'd said it would be nice if I did it. But then none of it came to, well, it wasn't them, and then it wasn't such a success. And it's kind of, and then the whole thing's rebooted now. Although I find it quite hard to see, because it was so a kind of ground. I mean, people still watch the original Poldark on Drama and things all over the world. So it was kind of, and it was such a different look than how it is now. So, you know, but it was nice to do that one, yeah. And it was quite, and it was shooting with a different, for a different company too. So I quite liked it, yeah. What else will be on the BBC?
But throughout your career, you've also come into series that, you know, might be the second or third series, and they have a very established look for characters. How much can you know, make it your own, or do you have to sort of pay attention to what has already been established?
Well, I suppose it depends what you're up to. I mean, when I did Downton Abbey, obviously there was a look for everybody, but because I did the one that was set in the war, I was really lucky because they were in uniform a lot. I mean, obviously Hugh Bonneville was in uniform. The girls were in nursing things. Everything was much lower key. So there was a kind of different look and a whole different thing. I mean, it was interesting because we had to do 2 special new regiments, 2 different pretend Yorkshire regiments, but we designed the badges and everything based on how regimental badges would be. And I loved doing all the stuff, especially in the trenches and things. That was really good fun. So that was a whole different area. And then when I've done things like George Gently, I did 3 seasons of that. And although Martin Shaw and Lee Ingleby kind of I developed their looks. The great thing about that was that every film, which was like an hour and a half film, was a new story, and that was all new characters. So I was designing for that story. So I did one about women's rescues and children being sold into adoption, and one all about people discovering about asbestosis, and I'm just trying to remember, really, really interesting, quite important topics, and casts just for those. Oh, and one about things, slightly dodgy things going on in the mines and deals being done between unions and so on, you know. So all of them. So you were doing stuff about how mines would work and how all those people would look. So although you would then have your leads coming in, I kept a kind of ongoing thing for Martin and Lee, just developing their characters, but everything else was new each time. So it was like doing a new story, and that was fun. But and then when I did, because I ran Casualty for 6 months, and although obviously they have the regulars, again, there are new people with a new story. So, you know, you think about designing that bit of it, and then you just keep the other bit, I mean, particularly with Casualty, ticking along. I mean, most of the time I was just kind of had an overview rather than, and I always did the new clothes for the main characters anyway, so which was quite fun. Yeah, and you look at it like that, and you look at the story and think how the people are going to fit into it rather than think I'm just going to keep.
So how has the role of a costume designer changed from when you started the industry to now? I imagine that the department's got much bigger.
Well, everything has such a short prep time that it's possibly less, actually, rather than more. And also because I'm not working, I mean, I'm not in a BBC office ever. I'm always working for a production company, because whichever channel you're working for, and I mean, there's a few things being made by BBC Studios or ITV Studios, but on the whole, it's a production company who've been commissioned by whichever broadcaster to, whichever broadcaster it is to make the show. So I tend to then base myself at one of the costumiers or whatever, and then you'll have an office eventually near wherever we're filming. But the thing that's changed hugely is the length of time you have to do everything, because modern communication is so easy, and it's so easy to send a casting out the day before, you know. Well, I mean, they try to, or pick the supporting artists the night before, and you know, you get the call sheet the night before, whereas when and they don't write, you know, and they write a week's worth of schedule if you're lucky. But when I started, there was no emailing or no mobile phones or anything. So when we went off to Cornwall to do Poldark, they'd written the schedule for 3 weeks. It was entirely cast. They'd chosen all the extras. So we had everything done, and we had the call sheet, all the 3 weeks worth of call sheets all done before we began. So it was a huge difference now. Everything is so last minute, you know, and you'll be talking to the casting director like 2 days before something's on, and the casting director's telling me, well, they're still in France. And I mean, there was one time when the casting director and I, between us, organised for an actor who was in France to come to England in order to have a fitting, because otherwise they wouldn't have had any costumes, because everyone had gone off for the weekend. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? So she and I organised his tickets, because otherwise there'd have been no clothes. So that's the other side of the coin. So there you go. You're finding that hard to believe, aren't you? But it's true.
So when we started chatting, you said Doctor Who was often used as a training ground for new designers.
Yeah.
Did it do that for you? Did it actually prepare you well for other productions?
Yes, I think it did. And I'd been an assistant already, so I knew what the deal was, you know. And there was the BBC used to have this enormous sort of structure that helps you. But every single show you do, you learn something new on. I never don't learn something, you know, because I did a thing all about the about footballers called All in the Game, and I had to design because we filmed it at Coventry's football ground, and so it had to kind of match a bit Coventry City's strip, but I had to design a training strip and an actual playing strip for this football team. So I learned quite a lot on that very swiftly. So it is amazing what you do. And that was actually, we had a fantastic, Idris Elba was the manager, I think. And then I just trying to think who else was in it. Roy Marsden and, brain gone. I'll remember who it is, and then I'll tell you, and you can cut it in because I can't think of it. But it was just great. So you learn something all the time. And I'm still learning things. If I did a show where I didn't learn something, I'd think, don't want to do it anymore. But I still do. I'm still learning stuff. I was doing some research for someone today and thinking, well, I didn't know about that. So there you are.
Well, I think that's a lovely note to end on. I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, Rosalind. It's been great to talk to you about a small part of your work. Thank you.
It was a great pleasure, Alex. Thanks.